Welcome everyone to today's SCItalks. So today we're talking about moving the needle on equality, diversity and inclusion. This is part 2 of a 3-part series. So we have 3 parts focusing each on women, ethnic minorities and LGBTQ+ people. Nice to meet you all. My name is Shireen. I am a registration specialist at CRODA, and today's topic is very near to my heart. So I sit on the Race and Ethnicity Committee at CRODA, and I'm also the ED&I officer for the Early Careers Materials Group at the SCI. So I'm really excited for today's talk. As I said, today we've got Ijeoma Uchegbu joining us. So Ijeoma is the UCL Professor of Pharmaceutical Nanoscience, and she is also the Chief Scientific Officer of Nanomerics Ltd. We've got a number of accolades and fellowships that I'll leave for people to read. But what's really interesting to hear is that Uchegbu is the immediate past at UCL Provost Envoy for race equality. So she's led lots of work on race equality and has helped to achieve the UCL's Bronze Race Charter. Also, very impressively, Ijeoma has presented to the UK House of Commons on the lack of ethnic minority representation in scientific research and how that starts in education. So without further ado, I'll leave it to Ijeoma to share your slides, and I look forward to your talk.
Thank you so much, Shireen. What a very kind introduction. So I'll share. I think you have to stop sharing and then I can share. Thanks very much, Shireen, and thanks very much for sort of inviting me to talk about this topic and to talk to you all. I really hope that there are some takeaways at the end that everybody agrees with. That's always my goal when I give these presentations. So this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about why diversity and inclusion is actually business critical. When I tend to frame these arguments, I don't frame them against a backdrop of social justice. I frame them against a backdrop of it being very good for business, very good for the UK, and very good for strong and robust decision making. I'll talk about education and race in our country, and I'll talk about who gets to do research and how that is actually viewed through a race prism. And then I'll tell you a little bit about some of the work that I did at UCL when I was the Provost Envoy for Race Equality. It's a job I did for about 5 years, and I'll really show you some of the things that we're able to achieve so that those of you working in the space of diversity and inclusion can see what can be achieved if you know you just sort of have good strategies. So I thought before I start talking about diversity and inclusion, I'll tell you a little bit about my day job and what I do as a full-time role, because obviously I have some, I always say I have skin in the game when we talk about diversity and inclusion, but I also have a full-time job as a scientist here at UCL. And also I teach pharmacy students, I run my research group. And I have a whole lot of other jobs I do. So I'm a governor on the Wellcome, which is the largest biomedical research charity by spend in the world. And I'm one of 9 trustees on the board. I'm also on the Academy of Medical Sciences Council and on the BVSRC Council as well. And in addition to that, as Shireen said, I run a spin-out company as well. So just talking about scientific research, this sort of encapsulates what we try and do. We're really about trying to make sure that we can control the distribution of drug molecules in the body. So we want to control where the drug goes. And we do that using nanotechnology tools. And the key reason why we're doing it, of course, is to make medicines more efficacious and have fewer side effects. So some of the things that we've been able to discover and contribute to the literature, things like we can deliver drugs and genes and RNA as well to the brain, and we go in through the nose and we get good gene expression in the cerebral cortex. And so you can actually target the cerebral cortex if you want to deliver genetic material. you can target the cerebral cortex by going in through the nose. We've also shown that we can target to the bladder. The bladder is quite difficult to get drugs into because the bladder is constantly voiding. And so we've shown that we can get drugs into the bladder, and we understand the chemistry around the delivery systems that allow us to get gene expression in the bladder. So delivering genes to these spaces is unprecedented because it's very difficult to get drugs into the brain. They have to be very low molecular weight, so less than 400 Daltons, and quite lipophilic. So to get something that's 1 million Daltons, which is a gene, into the brain and show that you can get gene expression is something that we've been able to show. The other area that we're interested in, that's, you can see in the middle of the slide, is we're interested in delivering to the retina. Not with a needle in the eyeball like that is done today, but we want to use eye drops to do this so that patients can deliver their drugs to the retina and fight sight-threatening diseases within their homes and not have to go to the doctor every 2 months to get an injection in the eyeball. And actually, when they're getting these injections in the eyeball, they're just in a holding pattern because you can only have a certain number of these injections over a 2-year period before you can't have any more because of the side effects and the possibility of retinal detachment and then ultimately blindness. So we've been able to show that we've got specific delivery systems that can penetrate the sclera and deliver drugs to the retina using eye drops. And then I talked a little bit about delivering genes to the brain. Well, when we deliver those genes, we're ultimately delivering them to cells within the brain where they are transported into the nucleus, and then you get the protein expression and evidence of gene expression in the brain. So the spin-out company has a technology which we use to do all these things. It's called our molecular envelope technology, and we actually won an award a few years ago as an emerging technology. We won first prize when competing against a number of other technologies. And so we've got drug delivery technology in our company, which we've licensed from the university into our company, and it really is able to give you more effective therapeutics and reduce exposure of the drug to healthy tissue, and in effect we should see that in humans as a reduction in side effects. So we've got 3 main work streams in the company. We've got a nose-to-brain asset, which is Envolta, which has been out licensed to Verpax Pharmaceuticals, and they're working with the NIH, a very large grant to deliver that into the clinic and test it in the clinic, and we're hoping it'll go all the way and become a medicine. We're doing our own clinical trial on some of the medicines that we've discovered in our own work, and one of them, of course, is OC134, where we're doing our clinical trial. At the current time, we have a clinical trials project and should be dosing next year. And the other thing that we can also do is that we can take an intravenous formulation and convert that to an oral formulation. So that's a little bit about what we do and what I do in the laboratory and what I do in the company. And these are the people behind our company, our leadership team: Andreas Schatzlein, myself, and Andrea Micah and Alan Bai. And Alan Bai has taken 40 compounds from concept to market. So we have a very nice team, Nanomerics. It's a small company, and we are based in North London, near Wembley Stadium, actually. And we have a number of our own assets. Like I said, we've got Envolta, which we've out-licensed. We've got another asset which we've out-licensed, which is a prophylactic against respiratory viruses, Ancula. And then we are developing our own assets also in the clinic, and we've got quite a healthy pipeline in the company. So that's sort of a little bit about what I do as a main job, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about my interest in some of the work I've done on diversity and inclusion. And I think what I have to do is just reduce the size here. So because the pictures were kind of blocking my slide. So I'm moving on now to talk a little bit about why we should care about diversity. So first of all, we probably have a rough idea, but I'm sure most people don't know that actually 1 in 5 people in the UK are from a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic background. So it's about 18% in the UK now that is from an ethnic background, which is either Asian, Black, or mixed, or a different background. So a mixture of people with Arab backgrounds and other parts of the world. And we know we've got sort of 50-50 men and women, but that's how our country looks at the moment. So when we did the census in 2011, the level of people that were from Black, Asian, and other minority ethnic background was 13%. And so this is a demographic that is growing and will continue to grow by all accounts. But we do have some disparities in our country when it comes to a very important parameter, and that is wages. And really looking at the gap, the median pay gap between white and ethnic minority individuals, you can see it's narrowed, but there still is a pay gap between the two groups. And overall, it's about 2.5%. But when you break it down into different ethnic groups, what you find is that people of Pakistani backgrounds, Bangladeshi backgrounds, Black African backgrounds, so Pakistani and Bangladeshi backgrounds in particular, the pay gap is a huge 20%. So for every pound earned by a white worker, the average worker from a Pakistani or Bangladeshi background is earning 80 pence. And Black African backgrounds also, it's about 90 pence earned for every pound earned by someone in a white background. So it is all about job segregation, and some people really segregated to lower paying jobs. And you can see the ethnic pay gap against multiple ethnic groups, and for some groups, for example, individuals from a Chinese background, there is virtually no median pay gap. But the message from this slide is that there is segregation of certain individuals in lower paying jobs. And when you look through a race prism, you can see that there are people from Black and some Asian minority ethnic groups. And it's not just your race that will influence pay, but also gender. And there is a gender pay gap as well. And there's a gender pay gap despite gender pay gap reporting being in our country for quite a long time now. I think it's probably close to a decade that we've been reporting gender pay gaps for large firms. We still have a 14.3% pay gap. So it is a country where things are not evenly distributed. And a measure of the health of a democracy has to be participation in politics. And again, you can see that in the UK, there is a reduced participation in politics for women. 34% of people participating in politics are women, yet we have 51% of our population being of the female gender. So things are not that great. And this sort of shows you what's happening in other countries. And you can see that Korea has the highest sort of gender pay gap. This is gender pay gaps, and countries like Bulgaria and Romania have relatively small gender pay gaps. So we know, we're looking through the prism of pay and participation in politics, we know that we do not have good diversity and inclusion when it comes to decision making. If you're earning a lot of money, chances are you're making decisions that affect quite a lot of people. And if you're earning a little bit of money, chances are you're making decisions that are affecting probably just you or you and your family. So we don't have the people, we don't have good decision making, which is diverse and inclusive in our country. But there is evidence that if you have diverse teams, you actually do have better results. And there's lots of evidence in the literature. This isn't my work. I've borrowed from other scholars' work. These are, top journals like PNAS. Those of you that work in science will know that PNAS is a top multidisciplinary journal. And what we're finding here is that if you have an ethnically diverse team, you do make better decisions in a multicultural society against a multicultural backdrop. So, for example, looking at jurors, and when the jurors were ethnically diverse, what happened is that they followed the evidence a little bit more and made fewer factual errors. And so this is quite important, because what it suggests is that when you are in a diverse group, you're more likely to try and make sure that you examine the evidence and not rely on dogma or some kind of belief or some kind of prejudice to make decisions. And I always liken this to sort of at the weekend, you're gathered with your family members and you're talking about maybe the latest television program, and you're not really happy with so-and-so on Strictly Come Dancing, or you're not really happy with so-and-so on The Apprentice. And you can really say what you like in those settings, because you're bonding with your family. But of course, if you have to make decisions about these kinds of things, and you have to make decisions in the workplace, for example, about who gets what job and who gets promoted, you can't just use your beliefs and your prejudices. You really have to rely on the evidence. And what the data shows is that when you are in a diverse team, you're more likely to rely on the evidence, because you'll be challenged if you spout your dogma. And they also process facts more carefully. So when you look at, for example, pricing of assets, and the assets are priced such that they underpin our pensions. Every single one of us that has a pension, even if it is a state pension, these state pensions and private pensions are underpinned by various assets. So it could be government debt, it could be the way a company performs on the stock market. And what you find is that if you have ethnically diverse teams, they price stocks more accurately. And we all know what happened in 2008 when certain assets were priced incorrectly. And then, of course, once they collapsed, we all suffered. So again, it's important that we have this diversity of thought and diversity of background when it comes to decision making. And it also helps innovation. This, as working in chemical industries, we are at the sharp edge of innovation. And if you really want to be innovative, you need to have a diverse team coming from multiple perspectives in order to inform the design of products and services. The evidence shows that if you do have a diverse team, you're more likely to introduce innovative products because you understand your customers a bit better. And then there's a famous McKinsey report, and McKinsey's been bringing out these reports for a while, and the report always says the same thing. The report says that and they look at, top companies. This time they looked at 1,000 companies. Previously, they looked at about 600 companies in multiple geographies. And what they found is that if you had diverse executive teams, the company just did better, was more profitable. And if you had diverse gender in your teams, companies also did better. So if we're considering creating a team to make a decision that's pivotal for our organization, it actually pays to make sure that team is suitably diverse. And then as an academic, of course, I couldn't but put this particular piece of evidence in, that actually if you publish papers across different geographies and with people of different ethnicities, your paper is more likely to be read and cited. And we can argue about whether papers that are cited are more important than papers that are not cited. But I do know which side of the divide I'd like to be on. I'd like to be on the side of the divide where my paper is actually more cited. So looking at 9 million publications, what they found is that ethnic diversity is a very, very strong predictor of the impact of the research finding. So again, the days of one lone scientist working in a lab or working in a basement and coming up with huge, important discoveries are long gone. If we're going to solve the most pressing problems of our planet, we really need to work across geographical boundaries and work with people from different ethnicities. That's what the data shows. So we know that if we work in an ethnically diverse and gender diverse team, we're going to get better outcomes. But what happens when you actually have systemic and quite entrenched inequality within a society? And the UK is a very unequal society. You can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor here. Shireen, can you see the cursor at all?
I can, yeah.
Oh, great stuff. So I'm just pointing to the UK on this graph. As you move towards the right of the graph, you tend to hit countries that are more unequal. And as you move to the left, you tend to hit countries that have less inequality. And you can see the Scandinavian countries are there, and they're looking at income inequality per se. And we've talked about the pay gap, and income inequality is huge in our country. I mean, we've got people going to food banks, and we've got oligarchs buying flats that are £20 million for a couple of bedrooms, looking out on the Thames, and £40 million homes. And then we've got others who can't afford to feed themselves. I mean, there was a recent finding, I think it was in the newspaper yesterday, that 1 million children actually suffered from destitution in 2022. And destitution is defined as not having enough food, not being warm, and not having enough clothing. That's our country. And when you have this level of inequality, so the opposite side of diversity and inclusion, what you have is a greater level of societal ills. Again, this isn't my data, this is Wilkinson and Pickett's data. So you have a lower life expectancy compared to countries of similar economic standing. You have poorer literacy, you have more children dying, you have more people being killed, and you have more people going to jail. You have lots of alcohol abuse, mental health problems. I mean, I'm sure we recognize this as our country. So if we really want to have a better society, better country, we need to have less income inequality. We need to have more diversity and inclusion when it comes to making decisions. I mean, there are some things that have happened of late that are absolutely shocking. And I just hope that maybe the media's got carried away. There was a case of a minister that said, you know, paint over a mural on a refugee welcome centre so the children don't feel happy when they get there. Refugee children. I mean, children who have run away from persecution. It's quite shocking. So now I'm going to talk about education and race, and how also when it comes to educational awards, race again rears its ugly head. And so first of all, I'm just going to look at academia, and you can see in academia. So if you start from the top of this slide, what you can see is that the majority of UK academic staff are white, but a stonking 16% of UK academic staff are Black, Asian, and minority ethnic. Considering population is about 18% Black, Asian, and minority ethnic, there's very good representation of the academic of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people in academia. Excellent representation. So you compare this first set of data with this second set. But then when you look at actual attainment, what you can see is that if you're white, you're much more likely to become a professor. So 82% of UK professors are white, 10% are Black, Asian, and minority ethnic, versus 16% participation. And you've got 2% of UK academic staff are Black, but 0.7% of UK professors are Black. And then when you combine being a woman and being Black, well, it's 0.2% of UK professors are female and Black. And that number should be at least 5 times higher. So it is quite clear that in academia, we do have some kind of barrier for people who are from Black, Asian, and ethnic minority backgrounds to progress to the very top. We also have a barrier for women to progress to the very top, because again, women are not represented as they should be when it comes to the professorship. I think it's about 20% of the professors of professors are women, versus about 50% of academics being women. So there isn't diversity and there isn't inclusion when it comes to my profession, academia. And this just says more of the same. This is data from 2019. About 20% of white academics in 2019 were earning above 60,000. But above 60,000 is a reasonable salary for an academic. You've got 25% of male academics and only 15% of female, and just 10% of Black academics. So Black and female academics, they find it harder to get paid higher salaries. It's harder for them to get promoted into the best paying jobs, and that is being a professor. So academia is also not very diverse, not very inclusive. But then what's happening to our students? When you look at the students earning a good degree, to me, that's when it really becomes quite scandalous, to be honest. You have 4 out of 5 white students getting a good degree. What's a good degree? A good degree is a first-class honours or a second-class upper degree. That's a good degree because that's the degree that employers use to shortlist. So that's the degree that everybody that walks through the door wants to get. Anyone sitting in my classroom being taught by me doesn't want to get a 2-2. They want to get a 2-1 or second-class upper or first class. If you're mixed race, it's about the same. But if you're an Asian student, then that number drops. And if you're a Black student, it drops even further. So we've got an award gap in the UK of about 18% between Black and white students. That's what we had in this is 2019-2020 data. And we've done some work at UCL. This is what it was in UCL in 2019. The award gap was abolished in 2020 when we moved our assessments to a different form of assessment, to more essay writing, short answer questions, timed short answer questions, and working within a short time frame to come up with an answer for things. So we then found that the award gap had disappeared. We don't know if it disappeared because they didn't have to come on campus, because there is an issue of campuses not being very welcoming to certain individuals. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But we've done some work, some scholars at UCL have really looked at this data, and they find that this award gap is not correlated with entry qualifications or parental socioeconomic status. So UCL is quite competitive to get into UCL. 4A stars and being refused entry is not unheard of. And you know, you can't really go further than 4A stars, to be honest. So, you know, that shows you how competitive it is. You need to have at least 3 good A's to get into most courses. And after you've got 3 good A's or 4A stars and you come into UCL and then you hit the award gap, it really doesn't, we're not doing our job, to be honest. And the thing about the award gap is then translates into the pay gap, because of course, if you've got a 2-2, you're not really going to go for those graduate jobs, and you know, one thing is compounded on top of another. So if you look at this slide, if you can just bear with me, the fonts are very small, but I wanted to include everything. And if you have A levels and you're a Black worker, you do have a pay gap of about 14%. But then you go on and you get yourself a degree and you think, well, hang on a minute, I've got myself a degree now. I should be paid more. But actually what happens is that the pay gap increases. So, you know, you're sitting at home drumming it into your kids. And, you know, I'm still talking to my grandchildren now that, you know, you have to get a degree. You have to go to university when you're older. They're quite young. They're just tweenies and some of them are babies. You know, you have to get a degree. But then why, if the award gap is going to increase when you have a degree? So we do have some serious problems. And I'll present, this is the sort of last thing I'll talk about, education and race. And I think when you look at this slide, you can really, it actually makes me quite angry, but I don't know how you feel, but let's look at what's going on here. If you start from the very left of the slide, we're looking at attainment awards at Key Stage 2. So this is 10 to 11-year-olds. What we always find is pupils from Chinese origin always outperform everybody else. So 4 out of 5 of them will reach the standard. If they're from Indian origin, 3/4 will reach the standard. When it comes to Black and white pupils, we've got about 2/3, both of them equal, reaching the standard. There is another debate about 1/3 of our pupils leaving primary school without reaching a standard on literacy, numeracy, and science. But that's another conversation. But then when we get to the A-level years, and we're now looking at pupils achieving 3 A's, because, you know, I did this work to try and see how likely it was for a pupil to get into a research-intensive university and then pursue a research career. So once again, you've got the pupils of China. These are British pupils. These are all pupils who are British, living in Britain and going to school in Britain. So 24% of pupils of Chinese origin get the 3 A's. When it comes to pupils of Indian background, 14%. So, you know, they could be second-generation immigrants, and 11% of white pupils, and actually overall, 11% of pupils get 3 A's. 3 A's are very hard to get. I don't know if any of you, I didn't do A levels because I did my secondary school in Nigeria, but, you know, I've heard that A levels, my children tell me that they're the worst exams on earth. So, you know, 11%, only 11% are getting 3 A's. But when it comes to Black pupils, what you can see is that they've dropped far behind. You've got 1 in 20, only 1 in 20 getting 3 A's. They've completely obliterated their equivalency with the white pupils that they had at Key Stage 2. It gets worse. And then we're looking at the award gap for degrees. So they go on, and I sort of looked at this data, bearing in mind that they're almost trying to track the same kind of pupils. And so again, we've got about 80% of white pupils getting this good degree. But what's happening to pupils? What's happened to British pupils of Chinese origin? The gains they had in Key Stage 2, which were consolidated at A level, are completely obliterated by 3 years at university, at our universities, our world-class, world-beating universities. So pretty amazing, I would say. And what's happened to our pupils of Indian origin, British pupils of Indian origin? They've also lost the advantage they had at Key Stage 2, which they maintained at A levels. And our Black pupils have completely lost out, because now you're getting about, it was 50% in 2019 and about 65% in 2021. For me, it tells us that our education system is not fit for purpose at all, because it is failing certain individuals. And if we want to have a diversity of decision-making, it won't be from this education system. I've talked about this, went to the House of Commons all-party parliamentary group and sort of presented this data, wrote a piece in their article. And people are beginning now to take notice of this as a bit of a problem. And we now have some schemes that have been sort of developed. So, for example, the Sanger Centre in Cambridge has an excellent Black fellowship scheme. The Royal Society is trying to also start a Black fellowship scheme. And at the Wellcome, we're also going to have a scheme for a fellowship scheme for people from Black heritage and Bangladeshi and Pakistani heritage. And the reason we're doing it is because of what I'm going to tell you now about research and race. So UKRI pays for my research. They've paid for my research now since 1998, unbroken. I've had UKRI funding. And both as a PI and a co-I, but UKRI recently looked at their awards. And what they found is that if you're a Black researcher, and I've tried to highlight it here, you're very unlikely to lead an investigation, a research investigation. Very unlikely indeed, despite the fact there are, you know, about 2% of people working in the area, and it's just not going to work out for you. If you are an Asian person, you have a reasonably good chance, but nothing like where it should be. And if you're of a mixed origin, then you have a very, very good chance of leading compared to the number of people working in this space. So there are virtually no Black principal investigators. To be honest, when I used to write for my grants and get them funded, I had no idea this was the situation. So it was a bit of a surprise for me to see this data. At the Wellcome, where I'm on the board, we also have issues with success rates for different applicants depending on their ethnicity. And we're doing something about it. So we've just appointed a senior equality and diversity lead who will join the senior leadership team and work across the board, work across the internal organization, across the funding that we do and all the institutes that we have, and really try and see whether we can have decision making which is diverse and inclusive. And we, like I said, we've also got this fellowship scheme as well. So in my view, I think that we need diversity in UK education and research. I hope I've convinced you that we need a race equality strategy for the whole of the education sector. Sorry, I think that schools should be rewarded for eliminating the ethnicity award gaps. I think the Office for Students should use money to try and get real proper cultural change in our universities. And I think we should publish this data, not just bury it in, a footnote 519 in a 1,000-page document, but it should be foregrounded so that people can actually see what's going on. What have we done at UCL? I'm just going to finish off with that. So we've got this race equality charter application. When I used to lead this work, the most important thing we did was we had this data sharing roadshow. So we went to all the business units, we went to the faculties and professional services departments, and we said, this is what your race data looks like, and what are you going to do about it? And so they made various pledges, deans and directors pledges, which were advertised, very made public so everybody could see what was going on. And then we went back and looked at how they performed against their pledges and, almost marked the pledges. And we had candid conversations around the time when George Floyd was murdered, and there was a lot of activity around the Black Lives Matter movement. And a lot of people were feeling quite traumatized. We had a video circulated of a man actually dying on video. And, people could watch this video as a man slowly died. Very traumatic. Most people found this awfully traumatic. So we had a conversation, 700 people attended, including the Provost, where we talked through what we would like to see that was different. But one of the things I'm really proud of is that we worked and got rid of the names of eugenicists from our campus, and we have a statement on race. Eugenicists from the early 20th century were decorating our campus, and so here, this was the announcement that we had renamed our buildings and rooms. We had people named after lecture theatres who had described Africans as no more than baboons, that Africa should be fully colonized by other ethnic groups and, basically wipe the existing residents out. And these people were challenged during their time. You could draw a direct dotted line between these eugenicists and what happened in the mid-20th century in Germany and many parts of Europe, the Holocaust. So we got rid of their names from our buildings. It was a long process, lots of conversation, lots of inquiry. Everybody had a chance to have their say. But at the end, we all agreed that we should get rid of the names. We set up a Centre for the Study of Race and Racism. It's just headed by Professor Paul Gilroy, a distinguished scholar. We did, like I said, we had the pledges, and we could see the faculty, the award gap in some faculties was reduced. Year on year, it was reduced. And then eventually, when COVID struck, it disappeared. And the School of Pharmacy, we haven't had an award gap now for about 5 years. So it can be done. We had more people promoted. If you're grade 7 and 8, that means you've got a degree normally. And we had a few more people promoted to the more senior grades as a result of our work. So you can really bring about these changes. We had someone else working on gender equality, but also we did a presentation where we sort of asked people how they appoint their heads of departments. And it was normally a tap on the shoulder and a drink in the pub, and you should serve, because everybody, and so Dave 1 handed over to Dave 2, who was expected to hand over to Dave 3. And we didn't have many women heads of departments. And once we advertised that, we should use we should use the systems that are available to us, and we should use our own procedures to appoint these heads of departments, we found a real change. It went from about 1 in 7 to 1 in 4 women were now heads of departments. I always end on this slide, and this makes the point that it's very important to have diversity in decision-making, diversity in all areas of work. And this really interesting study but quite heartbreaking study published by Brad Greenwood, looked at 1.8 million hospital births. And what he found was that in the first 4 weeks of life, neonates with serious complications, if they were Black neonates and cared for by Black clinicians, their rate of death was half of what it would have been if they were Black neonates cared for by white physicians, white clinicians. And so it is a little bit about seeing yourself on the gurney and trying that little bit extra because you really relate to this individual who could be you. And so representation is important because we are not just data points. We are human beings. We have emotions. And we all have prejudice, and sometimes the prejudice doesn't really make a mark, but also we should use our executive functions to fight these prejudices. And I'll stop so far and say I'm quite happy to take questions.
Thank you so much for that talk. So we have a question in, and the question was submitted around the time that you had the slide with the various stages of education. And how the proportion of ethnicities changes throughout that. So this person has asked, do you have data for how many graduates find jobs?
That data is on the HESA website about graduate jobs. We do track graduate jobs at UCL, and we know that we look at 6 months of graduation, and we know that over 90% of our undergraduates will be in graduate jobs 6 months after graduation. So we do track that at UCL. It will vary from university to university. But HESA data, I think we're mandated to report this destination data.
Excellent, thank you. Question from me. So I think it's quite remarkable the amount that UCL are doing on this. Has there been a trickle effect on any other universities, or are we seeing something similar throughout the UK? Absolutely.
We actually started, let's look at the award gap project. We actually started because we saw data from Kingston University. Kingston University were leading on this, and they had done so much to close the awarding gap. They had an inclusive curriculum, they had changes to reading lists. So they were the start. And then there was a project which was a call for proposals funded by what is now Advanced HE, Office for Students, but it was called something else before. And we applied with Kingston, and we worked with them using some of their methodology, not all of it, and started the award gap project. And it so that's how we started. But lots of universities now, especially looking at the award gap, have started working in this area. At UCL, we have about, when I used to do this work, we had about 55% of our students were from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds. So, it was imperative that they came to us and didn't go down the road if they had 4 A stars. And so we really realized that we had to do something to make sure that they graduated with the degrees they deserve, and not a degree which was tainted by, other issues.
Thank you. So we have a question. Is there anything that industry can do to influence change in academia?
Well, one thing that is being done by the Royal Society of Chemistry, which you're probably aware of, is the Broadening Horizons project. And our company actually participates in this project. So what the Royal Society of Chemistry did was that they recognized that Black and ethnic minority chemistry graduates were not going into the chemical sciences industry as much as you would expect they should. And so they started the Broadening Horizons project, which is all about bringing people in, giving them taster days in different companies. So we've got people who come to our company. Last time we hosted 20 people in our tiny company who come in, they have a taster day, they see how we work, and then we offer an internship, which is paid for by the Royal Society of Chemistry. And we had an amazing individual, Joe, worked with us last year. Absolutely phenomenal. We were all sad to see her go. But then these internships are open to these people that sign up for the Broadening Horizons project, and they go in. So if you are in industry and you're thinking about what you can do, one thing you can do is to pull some of these graduates into those high-paying jobs by offering them these opportunities to do a paid internship.
Excellent answer. And yes, Broadening Horizons is a great program. So we have another question. What key things can an organization like SCI do to help bring about change?
So for me, I think the biggest lever that I used at UCL was the data, because even as a Black woman, I wasn't aware of how bad the data was. And looking at the data and actually getting people to engage with the data, a lot of people are really surprised when they hear there's an awarding gap. They're like, really? I had no idea. When they, even though they look up and they see that actually that when I think about, you know, my senior management team at university, I can't see anyone who's an ethnic minority person there. But they don't actually realize that that's not because maybe they'll be there eventually because they're coming through. Well, actually, they haven't been there for 20 years, 30 years. For you, whenever you look at the data, they just haven't been. So one thing the SCI is to get the data and publicize the data and get, you know, do surveys, find out what companies are doing to change the data, present just the normal data on participation in the different areas, but then take those to the companies and say, well, what are you doing to try and improve representation at the senior levels? So hold them to account. What we found with the Broadening Horizons program, because I was there at the very beginning, was that everybody that was in the room, we had big, huge companies and our tiny company, we were completely dwarfed by all these big companies. Everybody was like, I had no idea about this. I want to do something about it. They recognize that if they wanted to have viable businesses, they had to speak better to their customers.
Yeah, I think today's presentation has been a really strong case for the story that you can build with data, and it's been really powerful. So someone has asked, could you say a bit more about driving inclusive behaviours as a way to underpin diversity?
So the thing about inclusive behaviours is it's what happens when no one's looking, eh? You know, when you have to make a decision on who to hire, and you know, there's 3 of you in a room and you're all the same, and you decide, right, we're going to go for this guy who looks just like us. Some of the things that we've done, which have been really successful, and let me just give you an example from recruitment, is that we had a fair recruitment specialist. We had people who were from ethnic minority backgrounds who were just trained in employment law and good recruitment practice. And they would sit in a recruitment. They're not subject specialists, they're not domain specialists, so they're not going to be able to tell you that this person's particularly proficient at one thing or the other. But when they're there, the conversations around race and, well, I don't think they'll understand him if he's teaching in the lecture theatre, those conversations don't happen. And once you start to purge those conversations away from the decision making, you do get better decision making. So now around UCL, we've been running these kind of fair recruitment specialist training and everything. You do see more people from ethnic minority backgrounds in senior positions. So that's just recruitment. It is, and there are lots of other things we were doing. We were doing things like inclusive advocacy, where a senior person would take a protege who was looking to get promoted, work with them, and the goal is to get them to apply for promotion after 2 years. What do I mean by work with them? Introduce them to senior people, take them to meetings so they can hear how decisions are made. Because also there are lots of myths and legends around, but if you go and sit in a meeting where you see how promotions are discussed, you listen and you think, okay, when I'm writing my case, I know what to emphasize. Or you can tell other people that are writing, I've done that in my department, you're making your case for promotion, this is what you should emphasize. Let me read it so that I know the kind of discussions that it will attract. So things like that.
Thank you. So we have another question. What specific changes did you make to the exams and course material to remove the award gap?
So that's a big mystery. It's in actual fact, there was no smoking, silver bullet, or what's the term? Yeah, there was no silver bullet. So we can speculate. But what we did is that there was no longer people used to go to EdXL or some other venue or some lecture theatre, and they'd all sit there for 3 hours. It's very quiet. Maybe they'd walk into a lecture theatre that's named after a eugenicist. I don't know, but that you get the picture. An intimidating space, confirmation bias when you walk into that intimidating space. And instead, people were doing the exams in their homes. There were time tests that would disappear. I don't know if you've ever done one of these. They're absolutely horrific. I did one sort of a personality test, and you have to answer the question within 40 seconds, and otherwise it disappears. You go on to the next one. So they had things like that. You could prepare for the essay, but of course it was time. Maybe you had 24 hours to answer them. And then we found that, oh my God, awards were better. And it was a bit of a surprise. So we're thinking, well, do we have to really go back to that 3-hour, please, can I go to the toilet? And I know you're going to have to follow me. Do we have to go back to that kind of setting, or can we work with this new online setting?
Thank you. So someone has asked, do you have any good techniques to drive inclusivity? I guess it's kind of similar to a question that we had before around inclusivity.
Yeah, I think if you want to get on this train and you really want to change things, the first thing you have to do is to get people to engage with the data, because of the moment you start talking about it, people say, oh, it's not that bad. I know Balogun Y, who's now a senior blah, and they shut it down. So what you have to do is to say, well, it's not about this exceptional Balogun blah. It is about everybody else walking into the building having a good shot at it, so they can help you with good decision making. So most important thing I found was the data, because the data doesn't lie. If I walk in and start saying, well, I just don't think there are enough Black senior people here, they might say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? But if you present the data, people engage with the data. First thing is gather the data.
Excellent, thank you. So we have another question. Thank you for excellent data-driven insights. You suggested that some students might not find the university system inclusive for specific reasons relating to their ethnic background. Are there practical steps we can take to make science more equitable that address the underlying issues in an analogous approaches to that taken in gender or disability?
Yeah, so one thing that we talk to the students about this, because the whole belonging issue is almost intangible. You kind of know if you belong or you don't, So I don't know, I walk into these stately homes maybe on a weekend, and I know I don't belong. Yeah, you don't have to, we can talk about it rationally, but I kind of know that I'm not sitting there. But I then, because I'm just gobby, will say, well, how come? What's happened? What did my granddad do that their granddad did? And I start to question it. But generally, you kind of know that when it comes to belonging, it's something which is not quantitative, it is almost emotional. But we talked to students about this and we said, what can we do? And one interesting thing that came out of that was that sometimes what happens is that you've got someone looking at a name and they just don't want to say it because they don't want to get it wrong and they don't want to offend. And the student said, I prefer you to say, can you tell me your name again? And then I say, it's Ijeoma. Sorry, I've forgotten. Can you tell me your name again? The student said, I want you to ask me my name 10 times instead of just ignoring me and always going to Claire or Rose or Tom. Just ask me my name again and I'll tell you, because I can understand that when you see all the vowels, your brain is scrambled. So just ask me and I'll tell you again. So that was one of the things. In small group teaching, there was a lot came out about that. Just treat me like a normal human being instead of ignoring me because you're worried that you might say something and I might say you're racist. If they pronounce my name wrong, they're racist. No, just ask me my name many times. And even if you pronounce it wrong, it's better than ignoring me.
Yeah,
so that's just
people are more scared to be called racist than they are actually being racist. So yeah, I feel you on that.
That was just a little thing that the students came up with.
Thank you. So we have a really interesting question. You mentioned that campus was a challenging environment for some students. What do you think can be done to change that?
Well, I think one of the things that we did was get rid of the names of eugenicists. I mean, to be honest, those names have stayed there for 100 years, and that we actually had to have a debate to get rid of them is pretty shocking. But we did, because my daughter went to UCL about 10 years ago. Maybe she went into one of those lecture theatres and, oh, who is this guy? I'll look him up. Oh my God. Definitely, if I walked in there as an 18-year-old going to sit my first year exams and did the research, I don't think I'd do my best. I'd be thinking, what does this place think about me? So that was one of the things we did. And it's one of the things you can hear from my voice, I am most proud of it, because it took a long time and a lot of aggro and many nights lying there without being able to sleep to get this through. But we did it in the end. So it is things like that, understanding what are your idols, what are your values? Are those values still future-proof? Have they survived the late 19th century, early 20th century to the 21st century? So it's that, and I think one needs to take a really hard look at the campus environment.
Thank you. I think, yes, you should be very proud of the work to remove the eugenicist names, but it is disappointing that it was so much work. So I think we might have time for one more question. So someone has said they've noticed often that people have prejudices, but they keep them hidden until they feel supported, say certain political movements and even COVID. How do you approach these and have a healthy discussion and resolution within a scientific group or generally even the department?
Yeah, and this is absolutely true. And I'll just illustrate my answer with a little anecdote. When we first started going into the spaces to talk to the deans and to present their race, the race data, it was really hostile. I mean, sometimes people sit there scowling at you for the better part of 20 minutes because what on earth are you talking about? The students are fine. So that's how it was. We encountered that. Now, we didn't encounter it because we were talking to people who had racial prejudices or anything like that. It's just uncomfortable to talk about race. It's not easy. But the Race Equality Charter allowed us to talk about it because we said, well, we've got this charter and we have to do certain things. And this is one of the things we have to do. We have to talk about it. So by the time we went in the third year, they were waiting for us. Data's improving. Look at what we've done, showing off what they've done. And they were now proud of their achievements. Yeah. Whereas in the beginning, it was all, I don't want to talk about it. By the time we had gone in year 1, year 2, year 3, very proud of their achievements. And the interesting thing for me, which I have to mention, is that sometimes we'd go in the beginning when we went into these spaces, and even ethnic minority people would think, here comes this troublemaker that's just going to make my life harder by bringing this up. And so even they were a little bit hostile. But fast forward to year 3, and then everybody's really happy. They're trying to help you with your slides, help you do stuff. The projector's not working. I'm going to run across the campus and get someone to fix it for you. So it is, once you start talking about these things and someone sees that, well, hang on a minute, the head of department is saying this is really important. The provost is saying that this is really important. So then quite a lot of people fall into line. There would be some that just thought that this is rubbish and I'm not going to engage with it, but they're in the minority.
Thank you so much, Ijeoma. So that brings us pretty much perfectly to time. So I would just like to say a huge thank you, not only for your talk, but all of your work in this field. Thank you everyone for listening and engaging so well. I've just got some slides to share before we leave. So we now actually have a slide on how you can join the SCI. So we've just got a little link here, and you can find out how we have different membership options on there. So we've got some future SCItalks as well here coming up all the way up to March of next year. And finally, just thank you very much. And we've got some of our socials and contact details on the final slide there. So thank you very much and have a lovely evening.